Without carbs, we're kind of taking a chess piece off the chessboard, and we're really selling ourselves short here, where we're trying to exercise, move, function with nothing in the tank. Hello and welcome to another vlog on YouTube and podcast on Spotify by the Fit Minds podcast. Coach Mariah Jean here. Apologies, I have no makeup on today. I know you guys don't care. And I probably look like death warmed up because I have a teething daughter, and as you would probably be well aware if you're a parent, I have not been sleeping again. We had an okay run there, but she got really sick. She's been sick quite a lot lately. I feel like it's a permanent state in that first year of daycare. And teething has struck again. So anyway, this podcast is going to be based around the topic of the carnivore diet. Look, it's really difficult for me not to get frustrated about the topic of a carnivore diet, just simply because as a nutritionist, I look at it from the outside and it just makes no sense. So it's very logical for me to dismiss it, because I know so much about nutrition. I've done my studies and I have qualifications, insurance, registration, all of the above. Probably one of the very few people that you could actually talk to about nutrition instead of your neighbor or someone at the gym who has no fucking clue what they're doing. But I have to speak on the topic. I have to talk about it. I've seen so many people lately telling me that they're on the carnivore diet, and I really have to hold back from eye rolling because I know that if I do that, they're probably going to feel offended or upset. It's not like they automatically know better, or the sad thing is it's just literally because the internet is a massive place and there's a lot of misinformation, and it's really difficult to sort misinformation from fact, from truth. Everybody swears they're telling the truth, and this is bad for you, and this is bad for you, and this is better for you, and you should try this detox. And it's like I'm not surprised people are confused. First of all, I'll start off with defining the carnivore diet so people understand what it is. People following carnivore diet consume high-protein animal-based products such as beef, pork, poultry, seafood. Some may eat dairy products and eggs. All fruit, legumes, vegetables, grains, nuts, and seeds are strictly excluded. The carnivore diet is often confused with Inuit cuisine. I mean, we're not Inuits. We don't live in the snow, first of all. Secondly, this looks suspiciously like some other diets that we've seen over the decades, like the Atkins diet, where it eliminated, I don't know why carbs keep getting attacked all the time. Carbs are really not the problem, but anyway. The Atkins diet, the paleo diet, I remember when that was about. Paleo is not far from the carnivore diet, although I would actually say that the carnivore diet is even more extreme, because obviously with the paleo it was things that you could find in the caveman era versus the carnivore diet is just literally eating like as if you're a lion. It seems human beings are not lions. In fact, we have signs, even in our genetic makeup and like our anatomy and the way that we're structured, even our teeth show that we're meant to eat both meat and fruits and vegetables and nuts and seeds. We have all of the right teeth for that. So we have certain teeth that are good for cracking nuts, biting into fruit. We don't have really long canine teeth, which would then be indicative of maybe we have a much, we're meant to have a much larger meat intake. And there's actually been studies, like significant studies, not just once-off studies here and there by people who want to sell more meat or for whatever reason have their own bias involved, but actual specific nutrition studies into how much protein, how much meat, how much in the way of fats, so dietary fats. If you don't understand what fats are, they're fat that's on meat, but also fats that are in plant-based foods, and carbohydrates that a human being physically needs to fuel their day and also meet their nutrition requirements to prevent disease, etc., etc. To the extent where we have actually dedicated, since the 1930s, not much has changed in a sense of the initial science that we found out is very much still true from then to today, and especially in the way of sports nutrition. But also that these guidelines we have for nutrition, you might be sick of hearing you need a balanced diet, but you actually do. And the more you ignore it and go chasing these fad diets, the more you'll be chasing your tail and ending the diet fairly soon. So just remember, it looks a lot like previous fad diets. Paleo, carnivore, keto, it even looks a lot like keto, which is they're just all, it's all like the same thing, just slightly different and named differently, and they're all attacking carbs. And what is actually so funny is that not a single nutritionist nor dietitian will ever recommend carnivore, keto, or paleo. Ever. Under any circumstances would we ever recommend doing that. Unless we're going through some sort of elimination diet to figure out if there's certain types of foods that stir up your stomach, but you may end up there by accident. But it would be in a very, very rare case that you would, be completely eliminating all fruits, legumes, vegetables, grains, nuts, and seeds. It doesn't make any sense. Why is it so alluring? Why are people being attracted to this? I'll talk about this in a second. But you have to, before you digest any information, let's say you Google something on the internet and you immediately believe the first article that you've read. You haven't even read past the first article. What you don't understand is that literally anything can be published on the internet. Anything. Somebody could claim that the earth is flat. Someone could claim that they can turn wine into water. Somebody could mention that witchcraft is real. I mean, the list goes on. I'm sure there are people out there who actually believe these things. Another person could claim that lizard people are real. Another person could claim that they are indeed a living cat inside a human's body. Just because you saw it on the internet doesn't make it true. And I think this is the issue with the carnivore diet, the keto diet, the paleo diet, is that these have all come from professionals. And I will tell you this, sometimes professional, sometimes not. Sometimes it's just random people on the internet where the craze has started. It could be an influencer. There's a bloke out there, I can't remember his name, but he runs around only eating meat and blah, blah, blah. And he's actually been caught out for using PEDs and all sorts of interesting things that he doesn't talk about online. And he has no nutrition qualifications, none. And for some people, people still listen to him. It's mind-boggling. Anyway, you can have influencers on the internet that state things, and I just want to reiterate, I'm not an influencer, I'm a nutritionist, a qualified nutritionist who just happens to create content, right? An influencer would be considered somebody, well, in my books, would be considered someone who's being paid by brands to post content on the internet. I am not. I run a company. I post content on the internet to create awareness around nutrition, which is literally what my company is centered around, is nutrition and exercise and health, right? So it's no different to having a GP or a lawyer who posts content surrounding their business because they have qualifications, they have insurance, they have registration, right? I'm a registered and insured qualified sports nutritionist. I don't know how many times I have to say this. If the information that you are consuming has not come from, if you go back from the original source, if you go, yeah, but my neighbor's dog, sister's, auntie's, brother's, cousin's cat told me to follow this because their neighbour's dog, sister's, auntie's, cousin's, brother's cat told them to follow it, right? Imagine just distantly just going, it worked for them, so I'm going to do it. And it's like, oh, cool, awesome. Would you take legal advice from your gardener? Probably not. Probably not, no. Would you, would you hand over your credit card details to this random person knocking at your door who says they're going to make you $1 million? Absolutely not. So why are you taking nutrition advice from a place that you don't even understand where the original source came from? The carnivore diet, if we were to trace it back to its origins, like its original, I don't even know where it's come from. Probably, honestly, influencers. Probably people on the internet who've decided to just claim these, outlandish health claims. And the other thing is that there's conversations being had at dinner parties and all sorts of stuff about, you might have someone, this is what's really misleading, is you might have a GP, a general practitioner. I always attack them, but there are some great GPs out there. You might have a general practitioner, you might have a brain surgeon, you might have someone who's studied, neurosurgery, or they've looked into the human brain, or a psychologist, or a podiatrist, or a gynecologist, or, an endocrinologist, right? So I just cannot reiterate this enough, right? Or an exercise physiologist. No one is qualified to speak about food or nutrition except nutritionists and dietitians. I don't know how loudly I have to say that. Nobody. 2 people. You must have an accreditation diploma, bachelor, master's, PhD in nutrition or dietetics. No, you cannot speak about nutrition and dietetics at all, legally, specifics, not even that. If you have done your PhD in rats eating, cardboard and the effects on their metabolic rate, and so then you've just distantly decided that now you could talk about, no, you can't. You cannot, if you have studied the influence of, even if you've studied the carnivore diet and the influence on exercise, it still doesn't mean that you can, even if you did your PhD in it, that you can then go around telling people to use it. Why? Because it hasn't been proven scientifically yet to be a healthy, sustainable, or even beneficial form of dieting for those who want to lose body fat or increase performance. In fact, there's only one component of it really that supports sports performance and exercise, and that is the protein content of the meat, right? Yes, great for muscle tissue, great for preserving and growing and recovering muscle tissue. That is probably the only beneficial thing about the carnivore diet. Can you achieve that with a balanced diet? Yes, you can still eat meat and eat all the other things. And I think what it is people are misled. They view foods as this big circle of all of these foods and they're all thrown in together. And they believe that if they just remove one food group, a bit of the pie chart, if I just remove this chunk from this big circle, that all of a sudden I've unlocked the secret to dieting. And that is not the case. Yes, you have this big circle, but there's lots of different pie pieces that have little colors, right? Different amounts that you need of certain things. Now that gets a bit more complex and people don't like complex, so they avoid it. But big circle, and the idea is what we want to do is of certain, yes, kinds of foods, we have less of them, slightly less, because they're more calorie dense. But overall, we're looking at the big picture of what's contributing towards this circle, right? And if we're having too much of certain things, it can definitely blow out our total caloric intake. Calories matter. They always have. They always will. And if people don't like numbers, well, then get someone else to do the number punching for you, and then you can just follow the plan. You don't need to know about the numbers or understand them. One day it might be helpful that you do, but you need to acknowledge that numbers matter. In order to be able to diet, you need to understand that a calorie deficit is the only way your body will physically, scientifically, mathematically lose body fat, and you do not need to cut a certain food group out completely to achieve that. I would liken it to chiseling away at a sculpture. If you have this big sculpture, right, and you want to create a picture at the end of the day of this, body, let's say we're creating a sculpture and we're chipping away, right? You wouldn't chop off the arm. You don't need to chop off the arm. You just chisel little bits off this arm and off the head and off the shoulders. And so this is the idea of when we diet, we're actually chiseling little bits of food off of our diet in certain places, and we're actually increasing the volume of nutritious foods and decreasing the volume of what we call high energy dense foods. Basically, shit that doesn't keep us full for longer, right? And that's what we really should be doing. So let's talk about, get back on track with the carnivore diet. Why? Who is it coming from? Influencers, mostly, people who aren't qualified, or people who say they're qualified and they have a medical degree, but doesn't mean just because they have a medical degree doesn't mean they can prescribe nutrition. Very important you understand what's called scope of practice. And it's so misunderstood in the nutrition world. I don't know why. Everybody feels that they have the right to be able to comment on nutrition, and it grinds our gears and drives nutritionists and dietitians up the fucking wall. Because I don't see people going out there and doing it, trying to stand up in court being a lawyer when they're not, or build a house when they're not a builder. Not everything you see on the internet is true, as I mentioned, okay? Initial weight loss from the carnivore diet is, let's talk about what it looked like, is just glycogen, okay? So the first 1 to 3 kilos that you lose, oh my God, I've been on the carnivore diet for 3 days and I've lost 3 kilos or 2 to 3 kilos. Yeah, it's probably mostly water. It's glycogen, okay? It's carbs and water stored in the muscle tissue, which is naturally stored in the muscle tissue when we are eating at maintenance or in a surplus with carbohydrates and we have leftover carbs. It's not body fat. It's literally like having your muscle as a dry sponge. Imagine having a dry sponge. Carbs just literally make that sponge bigger. That's it. They just make the muscle fuller. Your muscle carries water and carbs inside of it, okay? It's not fat, it's just carbs and water. It is the macronutrient out of protein, carbs, and fats. Carbs, we store the most in the muscle tissue. We do store some fats, but very small amounts of them that we've consumed. So it doesn't often reflect much. If we cut fats, we don't see much of a drop in weight of fat stored inside muscle tissue. And until we obviously then go into a proper calorie deficit, and then we start losing stored body fat, which is different to fat stored in the muscle tissue. It's very confusing, but basically when we eat things like protein, fats, and carbs, they go to different areas of our body. We use carbs oftentimes. When we don't use the excess, they're stored in the muscle tissue. So before they're stored as body fat or used as energy. So we have like a storage system for carbs. That's glycogen. And when you cut carbs, that's why you drop weight really quickly. But if you notice with cutting carbs, you drop weight really quickly, which doesn't actually make your body look any different. It kind of makes you look just like, well, flat. And you don't look defined. It's like, oh, hold on, I lost weight, but I don't actually look the way I want to look yet. Yes, because you haven't lost body fat yet. And then you'll notice after that you plateau all of a sudden. Oh, I lost a couple kilos and I plateaued. Yes, because you're not in a calorie deficit and you just don't eat carbs and now you're miserable. So also the risk is muscle waste over time due to lack of carbs and reduced strength. So we know with carbohydrates, one of the most amazing things about carbs is the human body is designed to use them as energy. So when we cut that energy source from our diet, we end up not being able to access energy, which is predominantly used from carbohydrates, for brain function, all sorts of things. So you start getting the brain fuzzies, you can't think straight, like, oh, why am I struggling to think of what I want to say? I haven't had enough carbs today, that's why. And the other part of it is strength reduction. So when you go to train in the gym, oh my God, my strength has gone down. And because you aren't getting as many carbs over time, your strength slowly declines. And then we end up with potential muscle wastage and that's an atrophy. And that's literally due to the fact that you just don't have the energy there to move the weights around because muscle lives off carbs. It needs carbs to function and move, especially in those moderate to higher heart rate zones. And you could say, okay, well, I'm not going to go to the gym. I'm just going to go for walks, and then I don't need to eat carbs, and I can just go for walks. And the problem is there, you still see muscular atrophy happen over time. Why? Because you're not going to the gym. And what does the gym do? It protects muscle tissue and prevents atrophy. So all in all, you can't get around it. You need to exercise. You need to do some sort of resistance training to keep muscle tissue and preserve muscle tissue, to create shape and also, prevent you from falling over later in life and dying. I've talked about this before. We want to be strong. Strong is good. We don't want to avoid being strong. And to be strong, we need carbs to be strong. But obviously, there's a certain point where we're over-consuming not just carbs, but also fats and maybe protein as well. But probably mostly carbs and fats. But mostly fats that people don't think about that are in their foods that then put them into a calorie surplus and then they don't lose weight. So it's about calories in, calories out. If I haven't lost you yet, keep going. So also, as I said, you'll fatigue quickly when exercising when you go on the carnivore diet. So the sustainability just really isn't there, not short-term, not long-term. Protein is indeed protective of muscle tissue, but so are carbs, and less so fats. Fats don't really do much for muscle tissue. Yes, maybe a little bit here and there, but they do not play as much of an important role in energy provision as carbohydrates do and as protein does, right? So without carbs, we're kind of taking a chess piece off the chessboard, and we're really selling ourselves short here, where we're trying to exercise, move, function with nothing in the tank. And what happens as a result is that we slow down. Brain function slows down, our ability to move around slows down. If you've noticed, if you ever cut carbs, you don't feel like doing anything at all. And the unfortunate part of that is that then you can't actually burn more energy. And when you want to lose fat, one of the things you want to be able to do is burn lots of energy. So the recommendations currently stand, from a nutritionist and dietetics perspective, 20 to 30%, some people push it to 35% fats, and above this marker, so above 30 to 35% fats of your total intake of your diet, so fats being coming from things like the fat on animal meat, fat in eggs, fat in avocado, nuts and seeds, so there's lots of different types of fats, but more than 30 to 35% of your diet coming from fat, okay? has health risks. It is actually associated very strongly with health risks. And most people who've been on the carnivore diet or talked about the success of the carnivore diet will talk about, I lost weight and all this stuff happened, but they will not talk about how shit they feel, how shitty their digestion is, or do they understand the health risks that they are putting their body under, unfortunately, as a result of undergoing the diet. Why? Because they're not qualified. They don't know what they're talking about. Meat-only diets and carcinogens. So there is plenty of evidence to support this, that unfortunately when we've seen, especially in the Western diet, we've seen it significantly. You only have to look at how many Westerners, Americans, Australians, UK, Europe, partially in New Zealand, etc., have high cholesterol, risk of heart disease, stroke, diabetes, obesity, etc., etc., etc. And it is well known that especially in the American and somewhat Australian diet, that it is directly as a result of a high fatty meat diet. Now, yes, they're getting protein in their diet, but the meats they're eating are quite fatty. So this increases saturated fat content. And then not only that, the carcinogens that are contained in meat, when we digest them, we basically need fiber from plants, nuts and seeds, fruits, vegetables, to buffer the reabsorption of carcinogens in meats. This is a scientific fact. If we do not consume meat with some form of plant-based food, together, we see that unfortunately carcinogens reabsorb into the GI tract. And what does this do? It actually encourages the forming of cancer cells. Yes, there's plenty of evidence to support it. So this is where we see that there is a real risk in the Western diet, because 1 out of 10 Australians and Americans are getting sufficient fruits and vegetables in their diet. And we have this crazy increase of obesity, pre-diabetic or diabetics, high cholesterol, heart attack, stroke, cancer, chronic disease. It's rampant, and yet we're in privileged countries. And it is as a direct result of the negligence of not consuming micronutrients, which are preventative of chronic disease. And when they talk about antioxidants, and you look at oncology clinics and cancer patients, when they're looking at treating the diseases, they're looking at their diet, they're looking at increasing their fruit and veg, their fiber, nuts and seeds. Oh my God, why are we all of a sudden doing it now, and why weren't we doing this before? So this is where it's actually quite scary. People are so utterly blind to what they're doing to their bodies. And this is why the carnivore diet is not only irresponsible, but incredibly dangerous. This is probably one of the most dangerous diets I've seen. Keto I didn't particularly like, but at least with keto, people were trying to get nuts and seeds into their diet. And look, paleo I didn't like either, but at least with paleo, people were consuming sweet potato and some fruits. And nuts and seeds, whereas with this carnivore diet, I think it is possibly the worst diet I've ever seen. I could look deeper, but I don't like to give them the time of day. Okay, so lack of fiber is, as I mentioned, a real issue. Fiber is contained in plants and vegetables, fruits, nuts and seeds, as I've mentioned previously, and grains as well. So yes, bread is included in that. Fiber is really good for our digestion. It is literally like the bristles that help to bring poop, through our GI tract. Chyme is the scientific term for poop. Now, it moves through the GI tract and it grabs onto other things and basically forms a stool, which then allows us to pass that stool. If we do not have fiber in the GI tract, it is incredibly difficult to poop. So you will end up, unfortunately, with the carnivore diet, if you've already gone on it or you know a friend has gone on it, with severe constipation. You end up with literally trying to pass rabbit pellets for poo, and you'll find yourself pushing and straining. And the other risk of going on the carnivore diet is that you could end up with hemorrhoids because you are so constipated and stuck that you have trouble going to the toilet. Some people find their GI tract is eventually trained to get used to the carnivore diet, but because of the lack of fiber over time, as I said, that reabsorption of carcinogens is still a very real risk. So it's not just the moving of the chyme through the GI tract, but the actual prevention of reabsorption of carcinogens coming from meats, especially if the meats are cooked very well. Okay, so cancer causing, as I said, and it is associated with, if we consume less fruits and vegetables, our risk of cancer everything. Metabolic health disease, so risk of heart disease, stroke, high cholesterol, diabetes. So it's like there is this direct correlation between lack of consumption of fruits, vegetables, nuts and seeds and grains, right? And a high fatty meat content diet. Like it's not even like distantly related. It is, if this person eats like this, they are 50 million, or not really, but a lot more likely to get these diseases. And so there is this direct link. They're seeing, holy shit, if you don't eat enough fruits, vegetables, nuts and seeds, grains, all plant-based foods, really, if you don't eat enough of those, then we will see that the risk of chronic disease and cancer is ridiculously high. You're looking at, some crazy numbers. I don't have them in front of me, but it's nuts. All you have to do is, look into it a little bit further with the risk of cancer and chronic disease, and you'll be shocked. Saturated fat and cholesterol, heart disease and fatty liver. So saturated fats, mostly we find to dive deeper, if you want to know why animal fats are not favorable, is for some reason, I'm sure there is a reason, our bodies, human bodies, don't respond very well to a high consumption of saturated foods. High saturated fat. So it's not just high fat diets, but also in conjunction with that, we see specifically with saturated fat. And where do saturated fats come from? Animal fat. So typically fatty cuts of things like pork, beef, chicken, like the skin on chicken, the fat on chicken, full cream milk, less so dairy rather than meats, actual animal meats. But dairy, definitely, we do see too much cream, milk, the saturated fat content increases of our diet. Yes, some oils, and there's a lot of stuff about seed oils on the internet at the moment. Seed oils aren't inherently bad for you, absolutely not. But for example, if our consumption of seed oils is then increasing our total saturated fat intake alongside fatty cuts of meat, and we're having a lot of this stuff, if it exceeds 10% of our diet, this is where the studies have been shown in all nutrition and dietetics studies and qualifications, we've been taught this, and it's just factual, that's where the threshold is. So 10% of your total diet, no more than that should be coming from saturated fats. And this is why the carnivore diet makes no sense, because it actually supports the notion of a high fat diet, a high animal fat diet. These two things don't go together. And honestly, past that point, we see people go in for blood tests. They're going in and getting their health markers tested. And I can guarantee almost every single time, if someone's been on a carnivore diet for a couple of weeks, that they will have elevated cholesterol levels. I can put money on it. And it's sad. I don't know why I'm laughing, because it's true. They end up coming back to me, I've got high cholesterol. Yeah, no shit. I knew that would happen. So I hate being right, but also fatty liver, heart disease, clogged arteries. We don't really, as human beings, we don't digest other animal fats. So fats from other animals very well, aside from, for some reason, fatty fish. So somewhere along the lines, genetically, we were, designed to eat the leanest cuts of meat on animals to try and avoid that inflammation. I don't know, maybe because we need the muscle that's on the animal. And then for fish and seafood, we actually tolerate omega-3s from fatty fish quite well. So our body really likes them, our digestive GI tract, our gut health. And our gut health is a really good reflection of what our body actually wants and needs as well. And you'll find that if you assess gut health after a carnivore diet, you'll actually be shocked at how atrocious it ends up. So fats and protein are not actually effectively used by the body as an energy source for exercise. As I talked about it previously, carbohydrates are the primary source of energy for exercise. So when we have in our bodies fats that we've eaten, protein that we've eaten, and carbs that we've eaten, our body prefers, so it actually preferences carbohydrates in those middle to higher heart rate zones. So when you're at the gym or when you're running or doing any form of exercise, really that's kind of moderately intensive, that it actually preferences carbs. Not when you're walking, but definitely when you're doing any other form of, slightly more intense exercise. So what does that mean? If we're not eating enough carbs, it then means that it's actually really difficult for us to get the energy to exercise, because our body does not like accessing either its own fat stores or consumed fats or protein we've consumed or our own muscle tissue, which you will eat. So there's two different types of fats we'll have in the body, which is fats we've eaten that are obviously then triacylglycerol stores or sitting in the gut. And there's fats that are stored in our body, right? In protein that we've eaten, and then our muscle tissue, which has come from protein. So it's turned into protein, right? Amino acids. So our body doesn't like using these as energy sources. It doesn't like using fats as an energy source. We know that because we don't lose fat very easily, do we? If we did, if our body liked using fat so well, we'd go and exercise fasted and we'd be able to go for a run and we'd lose all this fat and life would be dandy. That doesn't happen. Our body likes carbs for energy. And what happens through that process of carbohydrate access, okay, before exercise specifically, when you have it before exercise, but across your day as well, is that there is a scientific process called the citric acid cycle. It's also called the Krebs cycle, the CTA cycle. Anyway, you Google it. It's fascinating. It's very complex. But basically this happens on a molecular level. And what happens is carbohydrates, right? They say fat burns in the flame of carbohydrates. Carbohydrates become like leaves, like in the fire. Then fat is the logs. We can't light the fire without the leaves. And so the carbs actually allow our metabolic function, our metabolic systems to access more stored fat. Okay? So basically it's like putting fuel in your car. Your car can start the engine and go faster and further if you put fuel in it. If you do not put fuel in it, it doesn't really want to use the scraps at the bottom of the tank. It doesn't want to use, doesn't want to chew in to actually like start burning the tank itself. And so that's the concept, is we have to put fuel in the car. The car's willing to go further. And as a result, past that point, we use the car as the analogy, but our body likes to then access fat stores alongside accessing carbs. So it will actually take carbs and fats together and burn them together through that process. It seems complex because honestly, on a scientific level, it is. And this is why I think people have found it so difficult to wrap their heads around the idea of a balanced diet, because there's a lot more added layers to why this all works, whereas for them, it's much easier to understand just cutting a food group out. And I think that's where it is we've become so simplistic and wanted everything to be so convenient that if it's not understood as to why we're doing it, then we go for a more convenient option rather than actually going for what truly works. So the next point, protein from, yes, meat is good for muscle, but you still need carbs and you still need micronutrients, which are in carbohydrates, okay, and which you can only find from certain carbohydrates as well. Essential nutrients in carbohydrate sources, such as fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, grains, prevent and treat disease, some of which can only be found in fruit, veg, legumes, seeds, nuts, and plant-based foods. So it's like there are a list of, if you want to have a look at them, essential nutrients that our body needs, and some of them we literally can only get from these food sources. They are called essential nutrients for a reason. You are going to die without them. If you go too long, or you get very sick and then you eventually die, right? Like, so obviously not straight away. But if you go too long without these micronutrients, you end up with sickness and disease. And this is where we see that the risk of, death is imminent, right? So that's the worst case scenario. Or you're just going to suffer and feel horrible for a while. But they actually discovered it when they discovered that chronic disease could be prevented out on ships in the ocean where they had no access to fresh fruit and vegetables for weeks on end. And everybody was getting really sick. They were getting scurvy, they were getting all these problems, and like, what the hell? Why can't we just live off bread, and fish? Like, what's the problem here? Or not even bread and fish, but, just fish. And it got to the point where they were so deficient in all these micronutrients, which they needed from fruits and vegetables, they all got really sick, and a lot of them died. And this is where kind of like, I guess like old school nutrition, old style nutrition really began and started, because I suppose not even old style, but the foundations of what we know today is still very true. And I think what the issue is that people are insulting the idea that, they think that nutrition has changed drastically. I mean, we're learning more, but it's not like it's changed. It's not like, oh, we used to eat fruits and vegetables and now we know that they're no good. No, not true. They will always be good for you. Fruits and vegetables will always be good for you. Always. It's never going to change. The initial learnings that we found out that fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, grains, etc. can help to prevent and treat disease and actually improve our life cycle, extend our life cycle, right? So we can live longer. That is the foundation of nutrition. That doesn't move. That remains the same. And then we learn new things on top of that. So we stack and we stack and we stack and we stack and we realize, okay, protein is really good for muscle. We know that's definitely, it's a fact. Okay, we stack that one. And we know we need red meat for iron. And we start learning all these things. And the things that we're learning now about nutrition, we actually don't learn that much these days because we've learned so much about it that anything new is pretty non-eventful. It's like probably a little bit about supplementation, a little bit about, nutrient timing. We have studied the crap out of nutrition. So instead of scouring the internet for the next fad diet, maybe talk to a nutritionist who actually knows their shit. In caveman times, we didn't live so long. All right. So I know there was obviously the paleo diet, the carnivore diet, whether it was caveman times or what we were actually, I don't know where this diet's been drawn from. And I don't care to research because I just don't care about it. We didn't live so long. The average life cycle of a caveman was 30 to 35 years, if they even survived childhood. And the predominant reason for death, other than predators eating them, you could argue too that if they had enough protein and carbs, they could outrun the predator. But if they survived childhood, the main cause of death, chronic disease, sickness, illness, right, is why they died in those times. Why do you think they got so sick and they couldn't get better? Obviously, yes, they didn't have modern medicine, that's understandable. But first and foremost, they didn't get enough micronutrients. They weren't eating enough fruits and vegetables. They couldn't find them because they weren't farming them. They weren't growing them, and they were struggling to find them because they were foraging and running out of these food sources. So we found modern agriculture, and if you look it up, when modern agriculture was found, if you look into agriculture, and I've studied this as well, how much our life cycle increased, how much longer we started living for when we started to be able to grow our own fruits and vegetables. It's so crucial because then it became plentiful and we had enough of it to help prevent chronic disease and illness, right, and death. Not eating grains or carbs obviously impacts energy, and then as I said, fat loss and the citric acid cycle. So then we have metabolic rate. So that what our metabolism is capable of, how fast our car can go, is limited, which means that we end up burning less, and then the fat loss goal ends up being that, if we can't burn as much, we then don't burn as much fat. It's inevitable. So there's another association with what's called low energy availability and even menstrual function or hormones. So when we don't eat enough carbs over time, you only need to follow the carnivore diet for a couple of months to see that you'll end up getting an irregular menstrual cycle. You won't, bleed on time. You will have longer or shorter length. You might even bleed continuously. You will see dysfunction in your menstrual cycle because low energy availability and menstrual dysfunction, menstrual cycle dysfunction, are interwoven and interlinked. There have been scientific studies done on these factors as well. So it's a no-brainer. All of this is pointing towards probably don't do this diet. And hormone function as well. We obviously see that there's things like we need insulin, we need carbohydrates for brain function, we need insulin to be able to balance our hunger hormones. And so, yes, protein is satiating, but carbohydrates help to keep your blood sugar stable. It's like blood sugar is something we actually need, right? And we can't sustain blood sugar with just protein and fats alone. Again, it's not, blood sugar needs sugar to be stabilized. So it's like, we can't just live off low blood sugar, it will pass out. And the symptoms are horrible. You get dizzy, fatigue, you feel like you can't move, you're slower than usual, your response time, reaction times aren't there. And, with low blood sugar, if you've ever had low blood sugar before, you actually feel like shit. So the carnivore diet obviously demonizes sugar and carbs. And I really just want to put this out there and say this for the final time, not first. I've said it a lot. For the final time, sugar and carbohydrates are not bad for you. If you want to jump in my DMs and have a full-blown argument with me about why you think that sugar is the devil, like, let's go. I will 100% tear you down in a very scientific and factual manner. And it's because it's not personal, it's science. Sugar and carbs are not bad for you. Sugar and carbs are not bad for you. Repeat after me. Sugar and carbs are not bad for you. I cannot explain to you how many people have come to me countless occasions where they've cut carbs, they've cut sugar, and then they've ended up binging on carbs and sugar anyway. You tell me you're following the carnivore diet, but then a week into your carnivore diet, you eat an entire bucket of ice cream. Clearly your body wants and needs carbohydrates, or you wouldn't be in that position. So moderation is key. Moderation is key. And understanding that it is about energy balance. And I'll talk about in a few minutes what type of approach you can take instead of the carnivore diet, which will absolutely change your entire life. Okay, so calorie content of food matters. Okay, whether you like it or not, the energy contained in your food matters towards your total intake and whether or not you lose body fat. Now, if that confuses you and you don't like that, pass it off to a nutritionist like me, a coach who can make that work for you. And over time, we can slowly educate you and it can become something long-term that you understand. You don't need to know now. All you need to do is fix your shit. Fats are calorie dense. So a carnivore diet doesn't make any sense because it is generally a high fat diet as well. And fats are very calorie dense. So if you were to compare a tablespoon of olive oil with, say, I don't know, a slice of bread, if you have a look at that, like the surface area, right? The olive oil doesn't take up as much room, but the slice of bread takes up quite a lot of room. And you would argue, which one keeps you fuller? Now, logically, it's the piece of bread because you know it takes up more space. Think about it. In your stomach, a fluffy bit of bread, right? It takes up more space in your stomach. I mean, fairy floss wouldn't be the case because that dissolves, but bread, when digested, actually digests wholemeal bread pretty slowly. Oil, less so, digested pretty quickly, okay? It's a liquid. Anything that is a liquid, and liquid carbohydrates can do this as well. But if you were to compare volume with less volume, you end up in a position of going, this olive oil has 110 calories, right, for this tablespoon. So basically it's worth 110 points, right? If you're trying to diet, you want to eat less points. Makes sense. The bread, also 110 calories. Which is the smarter option? Olive oil is fats, bread is carbs. Now, when I actually explain that to people, they go, oh, I'm like, yeah, eating a ton of veggies, a ton of salad, a big bowl of strawberries, which doesn't have a lot of calories in it. Again, not a lot of calories in strawberries. When you start to understand that food is numbers and the numbers add up and it's not about certain food types, it's like this epiphany and you go, holy shit, this has changed everything forever. I don't need to cut out sugar and carbs. I don't need to cut out pasta. I don't need to cut out bread, or milk or anything like that. And I actually need to look at getting the balance right so I can understand what balance looks like. So exclusion never works. Exclusion of food groups never works. Never works. Is there a single food under the sun that I will not eat because I think it's bad for me? Nope. Has there been any food alcohol? Probably alcohol. Has there been any food in the past 6 months that I haven't consumed because I've looked at it and I've said, oh, that'd be, I'm not eating that. Even though I feel like eating it, I'm not going to eat it because it's bad for me. No. Have I looked at certain foods and thought to myself, oh, that's pretty calorie dense. I might have a little bit of it, or I may just skip this time and maybe have some at another date because I've already had something pretty calorie dense today, right? So I understand that food is numbers. I understand that there's no sort of good or bad. It's just a sliding scale. If it isn't feasible or sustainable, why follow it? If you cannot see yourself following the carnivore diet or your friend following the carnivore diet for the next 10 or 20 years, and if you lie to me and tell me that it's easy to follow, I'm sorry, but like, what type of sane person wants to eat just fatty meat for the rest of their life and nothing else? Nobody. Not a single person. People like flavor. That's where we literally we have teeth to be able to chew these things, for God's sake. If it's not sustainable, why follow it? If you cannot follow it for the rest of your life, how do you think what's going to happen after you finish this diet? You go back to doing what you were doing before and you think the weight's just going to stay off. It doesn't make any sense. Also, as I said previously, the weight that you lose on a carnivore diet, if you actually look into the studies, most of it is water weight, and then people don't know what to do after that point because they don't have any other education. They've got no idea what they're doing. So the approach should be 80-20 macros and micros, meaning that we have a focus on macronutrients, protein, fats, and carbs. This is my job, this is what I do, okay? I know this shit like the back of my hand. Micronutrients, then making sure we're covering all the micronutrient bases. So that 80% of our diet, we actually go, cool, how much can we get in here that's good? Green leafies, grains, balance, lean meat cuts, low-fat dairy if you're trying to watch your fats, which most people should be. Fitting in a wide variety of foods, right? Then that 20% left over is for processed foods, things that you like that will fit into your macronutrient requirements as well, but won't blow the bank, the calorie bank. So what we have here is we have macronutrients, right? Sorry, micronutrients is this little circle here in the middle. Okay, so this is like all the little fun things that we need to keep us healthy. Okay, so that's on a very concentrated level. So the things inside the foods that we eat. Okay, things inside protein, fats, and carbs. Yeah, we have micronutrients. On the outer circle, we have protein, fats, and carbs, which is a slightly bigger circle, meaning that there's more things that fall into that umbrella. Okay, so that's, meats fall into protein, fats, avocado, nuts, seeds, etc. Eggs fall into protein and fats, but that's okay. Carbs, brown rice, sweet potato, etc., and then some processed foods in there too fall into carbs and fats there too, yeah? And then maybe a little bit of protein depending on some dairy has protein, okay? And then on the outside we've got calories, and that's the bigger picture. That's the energy value of everything we're eating. So when we look at the 80-20 approach, 20% is the little processed foods here and there that will contribute towards macros, probably not our micronutrients that much, but certainly will contribute towards our protein, fat, and carb requirements. But they're the fun foods, 80% soul foods, 20% fun foods. It's a saying a good friend of mine mentioned to me a few years ago. Nutrition is a science, not a fad diet, which comes and goes. Nutrition is a permanent science. Science. It's science and maths. And it's funny, science and maths is used to determine medicine as well, surgery. All of these things we have so much trust in, and for some stupid reason, people don't trust actual nutrition, which is actually a science. It's a real science. It's frustrating. It's incredibly frustrating because people see nutrition as like this really left of center thing, and then they start adopting and taking on diets that aren't even designed by or even remotely, touched on by nutritionists. My mother told me a story about a party she went to over the weekend, or a gathering or group thing with some friends, and there was a man at the party, and I won't say his name because I don't know what his name is and I don't really care, who was he studied brain surgery or neuroscience, so studied the brain, and he did a study on the keto diet and it can be good for brain function, and it was really interesting because that's only been found in certain types of patients, for example with Parkinson's disease or diseases of the brain, and it actually helps to slow the brain down by not consuming carbohydrates, which then helps to prevent, the involuntary movements. But he was talking about this keto diet, I'm doing keto, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And I was like, if only this guy could sit down with a nutritionist and not speak at parties about a qualification he's done that has absolutely nothing to do with majority of the population, because this is dangerous misinformation that gets out into society and people start talking about things that they have no scope of practice in. Nutrition is a science, it's not a fad diet which comes and goes. The food pyramid is actually fairly accurate. No matter how much you want to hate on the food pyramid, it's designed by dietitians, nutritionists, people who've done PhD degrees in this shit. Like, have studied and studied and studied for years and done multiple scientific experiments to the extent where we've studied many things in life and proven or disproven them. And we need to stop looking for magical quick fixes and listen to professionals and, of course, our body. Okay? At the end of the day, if it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. Get your health markers tested, your blood tests done. If you are on the carnivore diet, you probably have great iron levels. But I can almost guarantee that if you have been on the carnivore diet for a prolonged period of time, maybe it's weeks or months, that your cholesterol levels will slowly increase, especially if majority of your fat content is coming from animal fats. So being lamb, pork, chicken fat, as opposed to necessarily seafood or eggs, because as we know, seafood and eggs are the exception. So that is it from me, a big old long rant. Looking forward to doing another podcast for you soon. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.